Trump threatens to invoke Insurrection Act as Minneapolis protests escalate. January 15, 2026. In a dramatic escalation of tensions in Minneapolis, President Donald Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, a rarely used federal law that could allow him to deploy military troops inside the United States to quell unrest. The threat comes amid growing protests and clashes in the city over federal immigration enforcement operations. Of the crisis. The unrest intensified after a series of violent confrontations involving federal immigration officers. On January 7th, an agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) fatally shot Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen, in Minneapolis, a shooting that sparked widespread outrage and protests. Tensions boiled over again this week when a federal officer shot and wounded another individual in North Minneapolis after what authorities say was an attack on the officer with a shovel and broom handle. Hundreds of protesters gathered at the scene, and clashes with law enforcement have continued. Trump's warning and social media statement. On January 15th, Trump posted on his social media platform that he was considering the Insurrection Act to put an end to the protests if state leaders did not act to stop what he characterized as violence against ICE agents. In his post, he accused Minnesota politicians of failing to uphold the law and described demonstrators as professional agitators and insurrectionists. If invoked, the law could allow military forces to support domestic law enforcement, a power typically reserved for extreme circumstances when civil authorities cannot maintain order. The Insurrection Act has been used historically in situations like the 1992 Los Angeles riots, but hasn't been applied in decades, especially without state consent. Federal deployment and legal battles. The Trump administration has already sent thousands of federal law enforcement officers, including ICE and Customs and Border Protection agents, to Minneapolis as part of a broader immigration enforcement surge. Federal authorities say they are acting to arrest individuals with serious criminal records, while critics argue the presence of armed agents is inflaming tensions. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison have condemned the federal actions and called for de-escalation. They've also pledged legal challenges, arguing that federal officers are violating civil liberties and that deeper accountability is needed. Community and political reactions. Local leaders, including Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, have urged protesters to remain peaceful amid the chaos, appealing for calm even as demonstrations grow in size and intensity. At the national level, the threat of invoking the Insurrection Act has drawn sharp criticism from civil liberties groups. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, accusing federal agencies of racial profiling and unlawful detentions in Somali and Latino communities, and arguing that using the Insurrection Act would be dangerous and unconstitutional. Public figures and commentators have also weighed in. Some argue the act should not be used to suppress protest activity, noting that peaceful demonstrations are protected under the First Amendment, while others warn that expanding federal power in this way could set a troubling precedent. What the Insurrection Act means. The Insurrection Act of 1807 is part of federal law that gives the president authority to deploy U.S. military forces domestically in certain emergencies, such as to enforce federal law when local authorities cannot maintain order or are unwilling to do so. However, its use is rare and historically controversial because it involves military involvement in civilian affairs. Legal experts have noted that invoking the act without clear evidence of a true insurrection or consent from state officials could face significant legal challenges. Minnesota's government has signaled it would likely pursue litigation to block any attempt to deploy troops under the act. Looking ahead, as Minneapolis continues to grapple with protests, legal filings, and heavy federal enforcement presence, many questions remain about whether Trump will follow through on his threat and what broader implications this might have for civil-military relations and the balance of federal and state power in the United States.